calling all my gluten-free friends. In today's episode, I am going to take you step by step how to make a delicious gluten-free pie crust from scratch. So if you want to make a pie, there is no reason why, for those of you who are gluten-free, why you should not be able to sit down to eat the best gluten-free pie made from scratch in your own kitchen. So in today's video, I'm going to show you just how to make this delicious, buttery, crisp, gluten-free pie crust that you can make and use for any pie you wish to make. Stay tuned. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of In the Kitchen with Baker Girl. Thank you, Jesus. It is another beautiful day to be in the kitchen, and today I'm going to share with you my recipe for this delicious, buttery, gluten-free pie crust. Now, gluten-free baking sometimes make people nervous. I know it made me nervous in the beginning. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. But if you have some knowledge of pastry, it always worked similar, but then different because there's no gluten, so there's no structure to your gluten-free flours. Now, today I will be using Bob's Red Mill gluten-free flour. This is a 1-to-1, meaning you can swap it out. 1 cup of this for as you would use 1 cup of flour. King Arthur has a very good gluten-free flour blend as well. I love using that, especially for things like breads. Whatever type of flour you use, make sure that on the ingredient list you see that it clearly states it contains xanthan gum. Now, xanthan gum is it's a replacement for gluten in any gluten-free because it's what gives it that nice stretchy texture, and that's for the experts to explain all about what that is. But just make sure it contains xanthan gum. If your flour does not contain it, or if you make your own blend, you can add xanthan gum to it. But I'm going to be using Bob's Red Mill today. And I'm baking a lot of pies. And one of my pies that I'm going to bake will be a gluten-free, we'll have a gluten-free pie crust. So I want to go ahead and make this. Now I'm using separate things because I'm baking gluten-free, to avoid cross-contamination, because I do bake with regular gluten in my kitchen. So I use separate equipment, and I'm also working with this at different times. So I always bake my gluten-free by itself at different times, never combine the two. Not unless you know that all of the contamination, cross-contamination things are set aside. So like for my pies, the fillings usually are fairly gluten-free with exception of a couple of pies. So I know if I can keep everything separate, I can bake my pies together as long as I'm aware, that I don't mix and match things that could have been contaminated with gluten. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to put my scale down and I'm going to put my bowl on. I like this little bowl, it's so nice. And I am going to weigh out 190 grams of flour. So, by the way, when you're baking gluten-free, it's so much easier to, it's 192 grams of flour. It's so much easier to, it's a lot easier to weigh ingredients because, sometimes you may not have measuring spoons, that are dedicated for gluten-free, as I do. I have, all gluten-free things just for that. But if you don't have it, it's a good idea to weigh things. That way, the less contact you come into other things that may not be set aside for gluten-free, the better off. Now, in here I have some sugar and some salt. Gluten-free pie crust typically does contain quite a bit of sugar, because you want to it helps with browning. So that goes with any pie crust. If you're making a savory gluten-free pie, by all means, skip the sugar. Why am I using my spatula? I brought my gluten-free whisk. Okay, whisk that in. And now we are going to add in butter. And I'm just using 1 stick of butter. Now, in my pie crust episode, I talked about how you want your butter to be cold if you're using a machine, or slightly softer if you're using your fingers. So you want it to be refrigerator cold, but not freezing cold. The reason why is I'm going to be doing this by hand. I could use my gluten-free mixer, but I'm just going to do this by hand. It doesn't take that long. And, you know, unless you have iron fingers, that can become a little bit painful to your fingers. So I'm going to go ahead. I got my butter in. I'm going to go ahead and put my gloves on. Okay, get my gloves on. All right, we're all gloved up and ready to go. Actually, I can set my scale aside as well because I don't need my scale. Okay, so now what you want to start doing, sleeves, behave. What you want to start doing now is just rubbing the butter into the pastry, into the flour. So I'm just going to take my fingers and just rub it in. And you make a gluten-free pie crust at this point the same as you make any pie crust, by hand or by machine. Same thing, no different. And you can double the recipe. By the way, I will leave the recipe in the description box below. I need a little bit more height. Let me see. How can I do this? Okay, there we go. Maybe I should have worn heels today. Okay, this goes fairly quickly. If you are nervous about baking gluten-free, you know, for any particular reason, I'm still up to my elbows. This is a very tall bowl. I actually have most of these bowls, I have a set of them, and they are all very tall. But this is what I have dedicated for gluten-free, so I'm using for that. If you bake, if you have like a blended family, you know, where one member is gluten-free and one member is not, it's a good idea out of, you know, respect for their eating, their style of eating, to have some things set aside. That way you don't ever want to risk making somebody sick with your food, ever. We want people to enjoy our food, not be nervous about eating our food. Okay, so it should look like this. Just like, you know, wet sand or something like that. And that goes fairly quickly. That's because the butter is not rock hard. Okay. Now, over here, I've got some water, and I actually added some vinegar to it. And I also have 1 egg. The reason why I have the egg is because it's another binding agent. Eggs are very high in protein, and it's a binding agent. So I'm just going to add an egg. It helps bind your pie crust together. And you can use egg replacer. If you cannot have egg, you can use egg replacer. So I'm going to go ahead and add my water in. I'm not going to add it all in. Like I said in my previous pie video, you don't want to over wet the dough, because then it could get a little icky. Okay. Now I do have a gluten-free bench scraper, but I couldn't, for some particular reason, couldn't find it this morning. So I'll just have to wrestle along without it. Now, I'm just going to tip this right out onto the surface. And like I said earlier, if you are baking multiple pies and you do know you want to include a gluten-free pie, make that ahead of time. That way you don't risk, you know, cross-contamination or anything. So make it ahead. And we're just going to make this exactly as we make any pie crust. Because just because it's gluten-free doesn't mean it doesn't have to be good. I think that's what get people. You know, they think, oh, it's gluten-free, it's not supposed to be good. Yes, it should. I mean, there's no, you know, it should be good. And don't worry if your first pie crust doesn't turn out perfect. Gluten-free pies, or any type of gluten-free baking, Oftentimes, I know when I first started, it's just like you're learning how to bake all over again, because the main structure to baking with flour is gluten. And with gluten-free, the gluten is removed. It's not there. So you have to kind of relearn and reteach yourself how to bake gluten-free, because everything is different. So it's all similar, but it's different. So just, get used to it. Familiarize yourself with ingredients. But I guess the most important piece of advice I could give to those who are starting to bake gluten-free because you have to, or you're baking for somebody that is gluten-free, the first thing I would say is just to practice and make multiple things, the same thing over again, until you kind of get it to the texture that you want. And always remember, it is gluten-free. It's not regular. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Now, because this is gluten-free, you don't have to worry about working up any gluten, because there is none. So that's another thing about gluten-free. You actually do need to work things, because it's not, there is no gluten. And so you need to keep at it to build up the structure. There we are. That's beautiful. Real nice. Okay. Now, another thing about baking gluten-free is, if this was a regular pie crust, I would let it chill before I tried to roll it out. But because this is gluten-free, if I was to chill this in the refrigerator when I go to roll it out, and I've done it, I've tested it multiple times, both the chilled and the room temperature, right from mixing, and I have learned it's better to go ahead at this point and roll out your pie crust. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to chill this. I will chill the pie crust once I get it into my pie pan, but I'm going to go ahead and roll it out now. Okay. So I've got a piece of parchment paper down, and believe me, it makes a big difference. I also have a little bit of my gluten-free flour. And putting down some parchment paper helps a lot. So I might actually do a top piece on top of this too. But you roll it out. Let me move this out of my way. You roll it out similar to a regular pie crust, but slightly different in the fact that it does have a great tendency to crack. And I do want to use the parchment to move it around. And also the parchment helps to get it onto the pie plate, because that's another thing about the gluten-free pie crust. It can become a nightmare to get it into the pie pan. All speaking from experience. Okay. There we are. And I think we should be there. I think we are there. You don't want to over roll it because it'll start to get thin. And let's just set a pan. Yeah, that's good. You may have some scraps too with this. You can just trim them off. Okay, here's the not so fun part, but we'll go on and do it. So take your pan, and I'm just going to pick this up, and it goes really quickly at this point, because unlike our other pie crust where we could actually, this is how you do it. Unlike the other one, we could fold it about. You can't do that with the gluten-free pie crust. It will crack, and it's gonna crack anyway. I'm just giving you a heads up. It is going to crack. But if you can do it quickly, as you can see, you can minimize the cracking by moving quickly. And the egg and the vinegar makes a big difference in preventing your pie crust from just totally crumbling all to pieces. But it's gonna crack, and there isn't much I can do about it. We're gonna have some crackage. So let's just go ahead and fold it over. Fold over the excess, just like you would a regular pie crust. Keeping in mind, there is cracking. So if yours is cracking, don't worry, it cracks at this point. Okay, go ahead and fold it over. And we will neaten up the edge when we finish tucking the excess off. If you have too much excess, just remove it. That's what I meant. You may have some scraps, because sometimes you can have a little too much edge. You don't want your edge of your pie crust to be super, super thick, because then it could start tasting it can taste a little chalky. So if you have to trim a little bit of it off, go ahead and trim. Okay, let's scrape that out of the way. Oh, thank the Lord, that went in better than I expected. And I've made a couple of gluten-free pies. So as I say, the more you practice at it, the better off it'll be. And, I don't know, if you made a couple of pies, you'll get the hang of it. There we are. Now, I am going to take my fingers and I'm going to crimp it just as you would any pie. The only thing of it is, you want to keep your crimps put your fingers a little bit more closer together than you would for your regular one. So let's just go ahead and crimp it. If you have cracking when you're crimping it, just smooth it over with your thumb and your finger like that. Okay. So there we are. Always go around the middle and neaten it out. And there you have a beautiful gluten-free pie crust. It looks good. And as you can see, it wasn't that difficult. And it doesn't take that long to make. So in a short amount of time, you can have a very nice gluten-free pie crust. Now, you definitely do want to chill your pie crust at this point, gluten-free or not. You don't ever want to bake a warm pie crust, because all your butter will just flood out and you'll have a really, really unpleasant pie. So chill the pie crust. You can also freeze it and proceed with your recipe, whether you're blind baking or you'll be adding a lattice top to it. But definitely chill or freeze the crust at this point, so that when it bakes up, it'll bake up nice and beautifully, and you won't risk having butter flooding out of your pie crust. So I hope this video shows you just how easy it is to make your own gluten-free pie crust, and you can save a lot of money. Because anytime something says gluten-free, it usually screams expensive. So now that you know what type of flour to use, and I will leave the recipe in the description box below. Now, for those of you who are gluten-free, or for those of you who have gluten-free friends or loved one and you want to treat them with a pie, now you have a recipe that you can use, and you know how to do it, and you can step into your kitchen and bake your own gluten-free goodies from scratch. So I hope you will subscribe to my channel if you have not already subscribed, and I will be showing more pie recipes. And by the way, speaking of pies, any gluten-free, any recipe for any pie that I post, you can always substitute a gluten-free pie crust for the traditional wheat-based pie crust. So never fear, any recipe can be converted. But if you have any questions, of course, leave a comment and I will be more than happy to answer your questions. Also, if you're having a little bit of difficulties with your pies, always feel free to leave a comment. I will be more than happy to answer your questions. So I hope you guys enjoy your gluten-free baking, and I hope it gives you some encouragement to step on in the kitchen and do it yourself, or bake it yourself. So the good Lord willing, I will see you guys next time in another video. Take care, y'all. Bye.